I don't know if anybody heard that ominous music sting when I brought Gary Groth on the screen, because
was that the Elvis? That was Elvis's "Thus Spake Zarathustra" intro.
So these guys have a history. There's been criticism between the two, but I know that they genuinely respect each other, and I also know that they probably bond pretty well over like a bunch of Carl Barks Ducks comics. So
we both have that. And I remember I met Gary. I think you were like 13 back at the Maryland Funny Book Festival in the days of Mark Feldman. That's how far back we go, if you can remember that.
I do now.
Oh man!
Thought I'd
Take
jog
it from there, Gary. Please, what do you want to ask?
Steve?
Good to see you, Gary.
It's good to see you. I think last time I saw you, it was at a party in San Diego about 3 years ago. And we chatted for a few minutes. So, what I'd like to do is I would like to ask you some historical questions, because I think I do have a few questions about what's going on today, but I think the other publishers are probably going to cover that. But I'm interested in having an historical perspective that I think you can offer. And I'm interested in Diamond's place in the direct sales market. And frankly, I'm also interested in Diamond's monopoly status and how it became a monopoly. Mm-hmm. I think that might be instructive to, especially, younger people watching this who weren't there at the time. So if I could take you on a trip back to memory lane.
Okay, that sounds good.
You became a publisher, I think, now correct me if I'm wrong, but you became a publisher in 1980. And that was, the reason for that was that you took over New Media Urjax distributor.
You said publisher, you meant distributor, right? You said publisher,
right?
I
meant distributor.
Okay.
And my understanding is that you took over New Media Urjax's distribution in 1980. Is that correct?
I'll give you a little bit more accurate assessment of that. I started out with, when it was still Geppi's Comic World in the 70s, and probably one of the first, if not the first, comic stores in the city. And when other stores started to open on the other side of town, I would get calls from friends like my good friend. He probably was the longest tenured Diamond retailer until he recently sold a store, Mike McKenzie at Alternate Worlds. And he'd call me up and say, "Hey, Steve, I need to carry new comics and I can't meet the minimums. Could you, add them onto your order?" I said, "Sure, Mike." And then before I know it, I had like 5 or 6 guys like that. And quite frankly, it was a pain in the ass to do this. I didn't consider myself a distributor. And I was buying from New Media Urjax, who was in Rockville, Maryland, so they were local, and it was a freight savings to have to go to them first and then on to me. What happened was when New Media Urjax got involved in a lawsuit with the publishers as well as the printer and everybody under the sun, they pleaded discrimination because Phil Suling had the initial monopoly, if you will, and he had drop shipping privileges, meant that Phil didn't really even touch the books. They were shipped out of Sparta, Illinois. You had to order them in increments of 25, et cetera, which was also a burden for retailers because if you needed 26, you'd either short somebody or get 50. And as a result, he won the lawsuit, and there were some concessions made. A lot of it was never disclosed, but it kind of opened up the direct market to other potential distributors. And then it was actually 2 entities. There was the father and son. Urjax stood for Irwin and Jackie Schuster. And then there was New Media, which was his other son, Hal. They merged to become New Media Urjax. And then when they won the lawsuit, they set up shop in Florida, and they had sub-distributors. They went around calling on all Phil's accounts and said, "We'll give you a better deal, and we'll drop ship." Hence, people like Bob Bierbaum in California could get them, and there was Neon in Ohio, Fat Jacks, and me. And we were all sub-distributors getting a better discount. But when they failed, one by one, the big sub-distributors were defecting and leaving them. And it turns out that because they were close by or whatever reason, I was the dumbest guy in the group. I was the last vestige of their cash flow. And I saw the writing on the wall, and I had to apply to go directly to Marvel, and I did. But there was that 2-month, 8-week period that you had to still be with the other distributor until your books kicked in. And I remember 7 weeks in, the final week boom, they went on hold with the publishers. And I had to scramble through my good friend Walter Wang at Comics Unlimited. Anyway, when they, so to speak, were put on hold, it was my first Marvel meeting, and I went down to Florida to go to the meeting as a full-fledged direct distributor. And I decided to stop by over at Largo, Florida to visit the former enterprise that I was buying from, New Media Urjax, because there was a couple of people there that I dealt with regularly and I wanted to meet them. Try to shorten this, it's getting too lengthy. But at the end of the day, what was happening was they had been put on hold, and they still had control, though, over the next 2 months' worth of books, which meant that even though they weren't paying at that time, I guess the position the publishers took was we couldn't arbitrarily sell those to somebody else to cover orders for those accounts, because they might still yet pay, and there might have been some billing consideration. So I used the analogy that it was like a corral full of horses inside the corral, but the gate was broke. Now, I could either A, let the gate totally deteriorate and watch the horses get out. But the problem for me would be there were other distributors and I might not get them all. So with the broken gate, if I could work out a deal with him, I could then fix the gate and have 2 months to buy some time to prove to these retailers that who didn't actually have a choice at that point, their orders were already placed, that I could do a good job. And that's kind of what happened. And when we did the deal, it was kind of, I gave him some, it wasn't really almost a cash deal. There was some consideration for free product because he was going to go on publishing and keep a retail store. And at the end of the day, he went off in his direction, but suddenly overnight, now I had a distribution location in Florida, which he called, what did he call it at the time? Fantastic Kingdom. And in Massachusetts, he had what he called Solar Spice and Liquors. That was his distribution arm in Cambridge. There were two that were his places with his employees. In fact, Carol Kalish, the legendary Carol Kalish, worked for him, believe it or not, back then. Then there were the other sub-distributors, which was Fat Jack, Mike Ferreira in Philadelphia, me in Baltimore, and Northeast Ohio News. I all of a sudden had all this business. The only person that didn't come to me in that deal was Northeast Ohio News, which ironically formed the nucleus of Capital City Distribution going forward, who would become my biggest competitor. But it was at that time that I became a legitimate, so to speak, distributor as opposed to a de facto sub-distributor under the auspices of my retail. And it was on February 1st of 1982, because of the trade terms involved with Marvel and the other publishers, I had to separate the two companies. So I formed what had formerly been Geppi's Comic World, the proprietorship. It became Geppi's Comic World Incorporated, Diamond Comic Distributors Incorporated. And then from there, the history, as they say, as I grew the business through acquisition. And then in 1988, when we had grown to be the second largest distributor behind Capital City, with Bud Plant being third, I ended up concluding another distribution acquisition with Bud. And that moment on, we became the largest distributor of comics. Is that too long? I'm trying to give you the facts. You want history, I got a bunch of it.
And that gave you about 40% of the market.
Gary, you got.
Say what, Dan?
No, I'm sorry. Please continue.
Gary was starting.
Gary,
I was just saying that gave you about 40% of the market, correct? When you bought Bud.
At the time I bought, I'll tell you the number. When Marvel would do allocations for limited product, they would have a market share number based on what was assumed from a Marvel perspective was your market share. And I know prior to the eventual Marvel's Hero World deal, we were pegged at 44% of the direct market, which was after the Bud Plant acquisition. So I think I remember this. When we swallowed the Bud Plant acquisition, it was a 60% increase inside. So if you do the math, whatever we were, that increased us by, for every $100 we did, that was now $160. And that's kind of the dynamics of that. But at that point, we're now the largest distributor, but we still represent, which was still a big market share, 44% of the overall market.
Guys, I want to break in for a second here, because we did cover a lot of the history of sort of the consolidation of the market in our last live stream. But I think one of the reasons I was anticipating Gary coming here is because back in '95, there was some criticism that you wrote about not understanding why other publishers would want to go exclusive with Diamond. Why would the industry want to put its eggs in one basket?
I think I can answer. I'll let Gary answer, but I think I can answer it. I don't think everybody wanted to. Let's start with that. I don't know that everybody wanted to. The concept was that if Steve, now remember, we don't have Marvel at this time. They've left. They're going to distribute through Heroes World on their own. So every distributor just lost 35% of their business. So that means when DC announced that they were going to go exclusive, because the thinking at the time was, what if Marvel did a good thing, and by selling direct to the retailers, it gives them some advantage? So DC took the position that, well, we don't want to buy a distributor, but we're going to go exclusive with someone. And that was either going to be Diamond or Capital, as it turned out. So we, duked it out for that. But by Diamond, and had it been Capital City, it would have been the same thing, is what I want to point out. By getting Diamond's, DC's business, and no one having Marvel's other than Heroes World, if you were publisher 3 through 10, you had to be concerned of the viability of the distributor financially. Yeah. Because if everybody's on this ship, it's kind of like, I don't want to be on the boat that's going nowhere. So to Capital City's credit, I will say this, Milton John Davis hung on valiantly, having lost their number 1 and 2 suppliers, and virtually all 3 through 10 went. So Capital went from 20 locations down to 1 and centralized in Sparta, and hung on valiantly for a year and did a hell of a job to do that with, trying to become a niche distributor. So from the perspective of wanting to, I don't think any of the publishers necessarily wanted to have their eggs in basket. Maybe retailers to this day don't want to have their eggs in one basket. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say what the good side of that was, because in the consolidation process, like everything else in business, there's good and there's bad. The bad maybe is you don't have a choice. The good was the industry became a lot more financially viable. Keep in mind, we didn't have Marvel for a while. And then when Marvel came back, it bolstered us up. But even with Marvel, I had to laugh, even when Marvel back, I'll share some numbers with you. In 1993, at the peak, Superman's death, kind of hard to refer to a death as a peak, but notwithstanding, all the speculators came in and kind of bogusly inflated the volume. Diamond did $222 million worth of business wholesale that year, and we were 44% of the market. When we got Marvel back and we were, so to speak, the only distributor, the entire market, we were doing 168. We were doing much less than we did at 44%, for all intents and purposes, 100%. But we started to grow again because there was a consolidation. A lot of the air freight wars went away, wasted money there. There was a lot of the negativity. So in the eggs in one basket scenario, it's kind of all our fault, all of us guys on the phone and everybody watching, because we are the consumers at every product we buy. We want the best, and we want it at the cheapest. And the only way somebody can give you the best at the cheapest is volume. And that's why you have Amazon, and that's why you have Walmart. We might bitch about them, but at the same token, there's a certain part of it that we are guilty of promoting it, because we say, well, I'm going to go to Walmart, it's cheaper. And then you make Walmart knock out some little guys, or Amazon. So in our case, because the way this industry works, the logistics of piggyback, like on freight, if you're Archie Comics and you're not selling very many comics, but you ride the same truck from the printer down to whatever distribution location is, it helps you stay alive. And reciprocally, I always said that the greatest things that ever happened to Marvel is DC having a hit, and the greatest thing ever happened to DC is Marvel having a hit, or Dark Horse, or Boom, or IDW, or anybody, because we've always been a hit-driven industry, so when we drive people to the store, they get exposed to everybody else's products. So on the distribution level, there have been a lot of positives, and we'd like to think they continue. But now, a lot of people think, well, Diamond's the 800-pound gorilla. They don't have any competition. That's quite far from the truth. That may be true on a certain level up until recently with a couple of new ones. But we compete in the toy market, the merch market, and all these other places, the book market. In a lot of cases, we're a tiny fish in the great ocean as opposed to a big fish in a little pond. So I like to think that those who know me personally, and a lot of you guys do, that we're not sitting, as I said last time, behind the scenes saying, how do we screw over the publishers? How do we screw over the retailers? We generally know our existence depends on your success. And that's basically the approach that I've tried to inculcate into the minds of the people that work for me.
Steve, thanks for clarifying that, because one of the big points that I got out of our last interview is, and this might have got obscured when you're talking about the numbers. I wanted to make a graphic about this, but after the direct market had such a contraction that the entire size of what was left over, and then Diamond's small piece of it, represented that like a really massive blow to the industry. And were it not for that consolidation at that moment, who knows what would have happened to direct market distribution. And I believe, that the Department of Justice agreed with that when they did their. That was basically the reasoning.
Well, the market had basically half-sized, and a lot of that was because we had an inflated full size. When the baseball card market phenomenon, or scam, if you want to call it for a more accurate word, was where people are buying cases of baseball cards, saying, I'm going to put my kids through college, these are going to be worth a fortune one day. when that imploded, a lot of these same guys came over into the comic market, opened stores. Now they had people buying cases of Turok, cases of Superman's death, and they were basically, it was a false premise for volume. So we're all sitting there saying, man, look at the volume. Every damn account that we had was reaching top level discount because all they had to do was buy one or two of those products in quantity. They had customers, consumers buying cases, which were in some cases more than a retail store would buy themselves. So that inflated volume was a big reason why our volume was overstated. So then when the collapse occurred and we became as big as we were percentage-wise, we were still dealing with far less volume. But the great news is, because comics are resilient, and not just, I'm going to keep talking just about comics, games, pop culture, merchandise, it inherently had a saleability that made it survive. And we watched the business grow and grow and grow, and basically better than doubled at a time when we had a lot less retailers. So it's encouraging looking forward from now forward, because I see the same thing potentially going to happen.
Guys, I guess my point was that it's not as easy to say as monopoly equals bad. That's the oversimplification that I see among so many people in the comments and on YouTube and all over the place, who frankly just don't know what they're talking about.